So a little over a month ago, Turtle WoW, a private World of Warcraft server running on the 1.12 patch client, they released what they deemed their 1.16 patch, subtitled Mysteries of Azeroth. With this patch came, among other additions, 3 new level 60 dungeons. These were Stormwind Vaults, Caverns of Time, the Black Morass, and Karazhan Crypts. The dungeons were introduced as being harder than Dire Maul, with Caverns of Time and Karazhan Crypts being given an expected clear of over 2 hours, in some cases over 3. I've posted videos of complete runs for Stormwind Vaults and Karazhan Crypts, with hopefully the Caverns of Time dungeon to be coming soon, whenever I manage to find a group for it, record it, and complete it. The Stormwind Vault clear was done in under an hour, and Karazhan Crypts a little over an hour and 30 minutes. I do think, with proper preparation and understanding of the pulls, groups will be able to clear the dungeons faster than the Turtle WoW developers expected. I've heard people talk about how groups, with party members needing Tier 2 or Tier 3, they've struggled, and you can see that my gear, well, I barely have anything out of Molten Core. My gloves and a neck piece, and I have the Kelsarar, which drops in Dire Maul and just requires that you kill Onyxia once. So I'm by no means raid equipped, and the majority of my custom gear has come from Stormwind Vaults, those being the Elite Guard items. When I first stepped into Stormwind Vaults, I had ordinary regular dungeon blues. My intention is for this video to be part of a 3-part series. I want to go over the 3 new level 60 dungeons, their pulls and boss fights, all from a tanking perspective, and offer my thoughts about the new content. Karazhan Crypts is the new dungeon in Deadwind Pass, and unlike the Karazhan instance in the Burning Crusade, this instance is behind the keep, in, as the name implies, the crypts portion of Karazhan. The new dungeon requires a key to open the gate. This is received from a custom quest line from either Magus Eridan Dusk Tower in Deadwind Pass for Alliance, or if you're Horde from Korrigan in Stoneheart in the Swamps of Sorrows. Only one member needs to have the key to open the gate, similar to the way Skullman's or the Undead side for Stratholme function. Once inside, you're greeted with a bit of an empty room. There's a large gate preventing you from moving forward, but once you move inwards a bit, a trap will trigger. This will spawn a swarm of bats with one elite bat that will do an AoE fear. You can see here, even after telling my group about the trap, we still wiped on it. It's not the easiest of pulls when you're unprepared, and you can't exit the instance when in combat. This is probably by design to ensure someone doesn't accidentally get forced out of the instance by the elite bat, the Crypt Fear Feaster, that AoE fears. There are probably a number of ways this pull could have gone better for my group. I should have done a challenging shout earlier while also triggering my Berserker Rage to avoid getting feared, and we should have had the other party members stack up in a group to AoE at once. The next step can also be difficult and frustrating, as there is nowhere else to go once the bats are dead but down. The trick here is to walk into the hole instead of jumping in. Walking in should allow you to survive with a slimmer of your health left, assuming you fell down at full health. We ran into a small issue here with our group due to the Warlock Imp's Blood Pact, which gives additional health, but also removes it when a party member is out of range. Regardless, the next step involves falling down into this hole onto a pile of bones at the bottom. Make sure you stay there, as the room is again filled with skeleton traps and stealth mobs. Trigger the skeletons carefully to not get swarmed, and once they are dealt with, carefully and slowly move forward as you progress to avoid pulling too many of the stealth mobs. As you can see here, my group accidentally pulled 3 at once, and I found myself lying face down, waiting to be resurrected. The stealth mobs do full shadow damage, which means their attacks cannot be blocked, only resisted. Shadow resistance is beneficial all around in this dungeon, as the skeleton crypt guards will also cast Death Coil on the highest aggro target, which will most often be the tank. Death Coil counts as a terror effect, not a fear, so it can't be avoided as Berserker Rage will not give you immunity to terror attacks. Continue moving carefully toward the first boss. Do not engage the boss where he is standing, as he has 2 stealth mobs on either side of him. They do not pull when the boss is pulled from range, but they will body aggro to you if you try to move where the boss is located. Once this first boss is killed, the doors in the previous room will open, leading you to an optional spider boss. It is only a few pulls away, so I do recommend backtracking and wrapping that up before moving onward, as the skeleton traps respawn quickly, and so the dungeon really punishes you for backtracking. A unique part about Karazhan Crypts is the underwater section. Having a warlock for their water breathing buff is beneficial, but not entirely necessary, as under this section here, your party will actually be able to breathe. I have noticed that the Turtle WoW breathing timer does tend to expire fairly quickly, so to avoid having to go back and forth to regenerate your breathing timer, if you don't have a Warlock, then Elixirs of Water Breathing are a good alternative for your party. Again, move slowly in this section as you don't want to get overwhelmed by the mobs here. You swim slower than you walk, so it isn't easy for a tank to go around picking everything up, especially in a 3-dimensional water environment where mobs could not only be in front or behind them, but they could also be above or below. Also worth mentioning is that when it comes to being underwater, there is no drinking. So mana is an additional precious resource if your group wants to avoid going back to dry land to drink after every couple of pulls. After reaching the water surface, you'll be faced with two sides. One leads to a boss, Corpse Muncher, and the other to the rest of the instance. Corpse Muncher's room has 5 elite mobs. 4 of them are the Crypt Guard skeletons, the Death Coil, and with 4 mobs all spamming Death Coil on your tank, it's pretty much impossible for a single party to handle this. The skeletons, however, will not go into the water, so it is best to deal with them one by one after dealing with the ghost, which will actually go into the water. In the corners on either side of Corpse Muncher's room are also going to be 2 stealth mobs. Deal with them and clear out the room before engaging the boss. He does an AoE cleave that hits melee, but otherwise is a simple tank and spank. On the other side of the water, you have the same deal, a group of 3 that won't enter the water. You can tank them all at once as only a single skeleton will Death Coil, or utilize the water to your advantage. Here you'll find your first mini-boss, who does a nasty curse giving players a negative 40% to hit chance. Watch your threat, as without a mage or druid your tank will be missing almost half of their attacks. In this room there are more skeleton traps, and another Crypt Fear Feaster patrolling around, which again AoE fears. This one also respawns relatively quickly, so be wary of it. The next boss is the Archlich. He will stun, he will snare, so make sure the spells are happening. By continuing up the path and up the hallway, you'll find the crypts. Inside several of them are runes that you will need to interact with in order to summon the final boss of Karazhan Crypts, the Crypt Watcher Alaris. While clearing the crypts portion, be wary of the skeletons that Death Coil, more stealth mobs, and skeleton traps. There is also another mini-boss that will again curse for a negative 40% hit chance. Once you've activated all of the runes, Alaris is just up the hallway here. I'd suggest pulling the 2 Crypt Guards far back, as their Death Coil can fear you into more mobs that are otherwise skippable. Once Alaris is killed, you'll find yourself right at the start of the dungeon, and most likely than not, the swarm of bats that has respawned will aggro your group, so you'll need to AoE them down again. At least for the 2 times I've run this dungeon, the Crypt Fear Feaster at the start did not respawn along with the bats, so you won't have to worry about AoE fears. Karazhan Crypts as a dungeon is very unique, and is a great addition to the roster of 5-man dungeons. The Death Coils are a pain to deal with, as you can't avoid them, and they always stand a chance of fearing you into another group of mobs, which most likely also have the potential to Death Coil or fear, which basically turns the pull into a severe downward spiral. The stealth mobs can also be a bit of a pain if you don't have a hunter to flare, as due to their high level they not only have a large aggro radius, but they will also do an AoE knockback, again potentially punting someone close enough to aggro other stealth mobs. Due to them being stealth, it's also difficult to determine how close they are to other stealth mobs, which will sometimes cause you to pull multiple of them. They also do a curse reducing healing effectiveness of their target by 75%. So running this dungeon without the possibility of decursing is simply asking for a difficult time. In a nutshell, there are 3 curses that are really troublesome in this dungeon. The reduced healing, the reduced hit chance, and the last boss, Alaris, will also curse a random party member, turning them into a rat that takes damage over time. This last curse, however, is at least interruptible. The loot in this dungeon is not that great. Staying true to other classic World of Warcraft dungeons, there are a lot of drops with absolutely terrible itemization, giving spirit or health per 5 seconds, caster gear with intellect and spirit but no stamina, and even cloth gear with plus defense. There are practically no tank items worth speaking of in this instance, aside from a shield for a shadow resistance set. but even then it offers only 5 shadow resistance. The dungeon is, however, full of off-spec gear for druids and shamans, and offers some nice frost resist items from the Lich. However, the most noteworthy items for this dungeon are actually the Cloak and Shoulders from Morass, which offer passive mana regeneration while casting. This isn't to say the dungeon doesn't have its fair share of problems. The initial bat trap doesn't despawn once triggered, and will aggro anyone who immediately zones into the dungeon once it is activated. This is most obviously a problem for groups who wipe on the pull, like in my video. But there is also the problem of new members joining the group when someone else leaves. A previous run I was in, which I also recorded, but I didn't really upload the full video, we had a druid disconnect, and when they rejoined the server, they spawned outside of the instance. Since they were outside, as soon as they zoned in, they would be attacked by the bats. And since by instance design, you have to jump down the hole after the bats are dealt with and can only get back up there after the final boss is dead, the rest of the group, we were unable to go back and help our druid. I was able to whisper a GM to port the druid to us, but a short time later, another one of our DPS had to leave, and we were forced to complete the rest of the dungeon in a 4-man group because there was no way for a 5th to easily join us. The one pull where you are forced to constantly reset crypt guards by abusing the water mechanic is also questionable. The pull is simply too difficult to tank at once, and with 4 of the 5 mobs casting Death Coil on your tank and other party members, the chances of being able to tank 5 mobs without the water abuse and without pulling additional mobs is most likely non-existent. This dungeon on the Turtle WoW server isn't run very often. The pulls can be frustrating, and mistakes outside of the player's control can easily happen, such as the death coils, the AoE fears, and even the initial jump onto the skeleton pile as was brought up earlier due to blood pact issues. If the falls were safer, if the unstealth mobs were a bit easier to see, for example I used the Cat's Eye Elixir in one run and I still couldn't see them, and if the fears were dispellable, then I think the dungeon would see a bit more activity than it currently does. There is also the minor issue that the last boss drops only a single item. For the difficulty of this type of dungeon, and keeping with the similarity of other endgame dungeon bosses, I do think the number of drops should be increased to 2. Regardless of the criticism, the developers have done an amazing job bringing this unused instance to life. It is an amazing addition to the World of Warcraft, and really speaks to the quality of content that this team is putting out. There have been many videos out there showcasing some of this custom content, particularly the High Elf and Goblin starting zones, and various other custom quests. I wanted to expand on this volume of content by showcasing the new level 60 dungeons the server offers, which not many will get the benefit to experience as they are not that easily accessible. Please look forward to my next videos covering both the Stormwind Vault and the Caverns of Time Black Morass. Thank you for watching.